If you had a microscope and could look at a piece of a leaf, you would see thousands of tiny openings which branch out until the leaf has all of the materials it needs. What happens now?
It's time for you to move on to exercise number 3. So I've created a fake little logo for a company called Knowles Neckties. I don't know if you've noticed this yet, but I really like to wear ties, so that's something I do a lot. So I created this little logo in Photoshop. And to make this a little bit more challenging for you, I definitely set everything in groups, right, or folders, which will open up as pre-comps. And let's just go over this in Photoshop here for a sec. Okay, so the background stripes, let's work bottom to top. The background stripes are pretty much the same as the ones that I did in the exercise lecture, except for that I now have some horizontal and some vertical stripes, okay? So you'll need to navigate through all those. And the banner is very similar. Instead of sticking out like that, it sticks in like this, so you'll have to make that kind of adjustment. And there are little dots here instead of triangles or diamonds, whatever I had in the last one. But I think it's fairly similar. And here, I've broken down the type for you into all these layers, one per letter, including the apostrophe. And remember in the exercise, I did that from Illustrator, but that was just to show you, again, to explain for the millionth time, how you can bring in Illustrator and Photoshop layers and work with them all together. But rather than doing that, I'm just going to have you import everything from Photoshop. So there's all the letters. And finally, here is the shirt and tie. And I should probably go over this for a sec and kind of show you how I built this. So in these layers here, I've actually given you 4 different tie options, depending on how you want to, for the final step, color your layers. I want you to do like what I did, and I designed this all black and white except the ties, and I want you to come up with a nice color scheme once it's all animated, and then choose whichever tie you think would match the color palette that you've come up with best. Or I guess you can also color the ties too if you want. Here, the default is the classic black with School of Motion logo, so whichever one you want. Just so you know, the way that I built this in layers, it kind of had to be this way that if I turn off the ties for one sec, you see, I needed something to slip the tie between 2 different layers, so I had to build a front collar and then the shirt backing. So it looks pretty strange in pieces, but I had to do it this way. Otherwise, the tie would have just sort of like stuck on top of the layers, and I kind of wanted it to fit in a little bit nicer than that. So I'm going to move this back down, right? And turn this all back on, and that should be fine. I hope that explains it. Let's look at this in After Effects real quick and talk about any differences that there might be between the one that I did and this one. Okay, here we are in After Effects, and you'll need to go ahead and import this project in, right? So Command-I to import, and find the artwork. Don't forget to hit Options, and you should choose either composition or composition retain layer sizes. I'm going to choose the latter, but you really could choose either. It's very much a preference, and it's up to you. It sort of depends, again, on where you want the anchor point and if you want the artwork to lay out perfectly and have a big bounding box around it. So yeah, personal choice. I'm choosing retain layer sizes. Editable layer styles is great. Okay, here we go. And if we double-click the composition, and you'll see up in here, it's got all the layers and all the pre-comp groups, just like before, so that worked well. You've got the background stripes layer, which, because we imported, or because I imported it as a composition and retained layer sizes, the anchor points default to the center of all these layers here, right? So you'll need to move them, and you'll need to decide, where it's scaling from. The one thing that's slightly tricky here, which I do want to mention, is in my example that I did, I was able to copy and paste the animation for one layer to all of them. And that was because all of those were moving horizontally. And here, there's going to be a little bit of a difference, okay? So definitely make sure that you understand this. For example, vertical one, I'm going to take this, press Y for my pan behind tool, move this up to the top, okay? And I held down a command. And then also for H1, which is horizontal one, I'm going to do the same thing and move this over here. Again, you don't need to animate these this way, but I just want to show you this one difference. If I look at the scale by pressing S for both of these, right, and then I unchain them, okay, like you'd have to do. For the vertical one, I need to animate this on the Y, not the X, but the Y, once I've unchained it, right? So that the animation is happening between 0 and 100 on the Y axis, like this, right? And for this one, the horizontal one, I need to animate it on the horizontal or X axis here once I've unchained this, right? So if I were to, for example, I'm going to undo that all, right? And if I were to make a keyframe, like if I move 10 frames and make a keyframe for this one and move back, right? And then this one, again, has to be animated on the Y. So if I move this or click on this and type 0, right? And then I copy and paste this onto one of the horizontal layers, even though I've moved the anchor point, right? If I paste this here, now this animates on like that, which is not what I want because it's animating also on the vertical, right? We need to animate this on the horizontal. So if I go back here to this keyframe, I have to delete out the first one and go back and make this 0, okay? Not the other one. Just in case that was going to trip anybody up, I just wanted to mention that now these will animate properly, and you should always pay attention to the X and the Y and which direction you want to move that in, okay? The only other thing I think that might be tricky, I think everything else is really very much the same, except this one thing, and I definitely need to go over this. So because I laid out the collar front and the shirt backing as two separate layers, and because I imported and retained layer sizes, now I'm going to turn off my ties for 1 sec because I think those will animate separately. But my collar front and my shirt backing, these two layers, I kind of always want them to look like one layer, but they're actually broken into two. And just say I wanted to do like a rotation where this like spins on and scales up, okay? I kind of imagine that. So what I would do is select both layers and press S, make a scale keyframe at 100, press Shift R, and then make a a rotation keyframe here. And then if I move back, just say 10 frames or whatever, I'm going to zoom in on my timeline a bit here, you'll see that right now the collar's anchor point is up here and the shirt's anchor point is here, okay? So if I were to do the same kind of animation where I scale these both down to 0, you can see here now that they're kind of scaling in different directions because of that anchor point. And similarly, I'm going to undo that. If I rotate them, they're going to kind of break apart with the rotation, which kind of looks cool in a certain way. And maybe that's going to be how you animate it. But if you want it all to animate together as though it's one object, which is kind of what I was thinking, you first need to take this step, okay? Take the collar front and with the pan behind tool chosen, which actually happens to be what I have chosen right now, I want you to move this anchor point so that it lines up exactly with the anchor point of the shirt, okay? If you click on the shirt, you see that the anchor point's about here. Now if I click back on the collar front, and I take this anchor point, pan behind tool selected, this is another great thing. If I kind of move in the area of where that other anchor point is, and then I hold Command, you'll see that it kind of snaps in there, and it sort of like, click, snaps right in there, which is really nice, because now you can say with confidence that both of these are going to rotate and scale from the same point, which is going to be really important in this case. So if I back up a couple frames, now if I rotate them both at the same time, they both rotate together, and if I scale them at the same time, they'll both scale together, all right? I think that's probably the easier way to go, and this is something you do a lot in After Effects, is you break things up into layers so that you can kind of like place objects or maybe do other animations between those layers, but then you frequently need them to kind of animate together. So be really careful and pay really careful attention to that anchor point. That's really good advice. And other than that, I think, the other tricky thing I'll say here is I think for the tie, if you want the tie to animate separately, which I broke down so you could animate separately, I think this will also need to have a different anchor point. Right now, the tie defaults, because we imported and retained layer sizes, to having the anchor point in the center, which means that when it rotates or scales, it rotates like this, which I just don't see that being the way a tie rotates, which I think of as being kind of from the top, right? So what I would probably do is take the anchor point and click and move this up to the top here, right? Which now means that this can kind of rotate that way, which I think is more what you want. Now, I will say, now that that's got a different anchor point, it won't rotate and scale on if that's how you want to, for example, animate the shirt backing. the collar and the shirt and the tie, now if they all rotate, they'll kind of look broken, right? So you're going to have to figure this out. If that's where you want the anchor point for the tie, which I think that kind of makes sense to have it up at the top, you'll need to figure out a way to bring this tie on after the shirt and collar already come on screen, I think, so that it can kind of like, for example, the tie could scale up from 0 along that anchor point, like boing, just as long as it's not trying to animate with the shirt and collar, as long as the anchor point's in a different place. Okay, so this is really good practice for dealing with anchor point and with these pre-comps, and just in general for creating some animation. I don't see this as being particularly long, maybe a couple of seconds. The one thing you definitely want with any kind of logo is to have it animate on. Maybe it'll take a second or so or two, and then you want to leave it on screen for like another second at least. So you don't want the animation to happen and then it to be over like that. So create the animation and then let it hang for at least a second, okay? You can always chop more off at the end, or your editor could for the commercial that you're working on for Noel's Neckties or whatever. But if there's not enough time when it hangs, that's definitely a problem with the graphics, okay? So go ahead and animate this and do that and have a lot of fun with it and make it as creative as you can. And definitely make sure to apply some effects, some of those color correct effects to all of this, to make it look really nice and to have it match whichever tie that you choose. And remember, certain things you'll have to get in, like the shirt, for example. I think you can't color this as a pre-comp because it's got the ties with the colors in it. So you'll have to get into this pre-comp and color the shirt individually, possibly color the collar, although that's just white actually, so you probably won't need to do that. You can leave the collar white. But if you want, you could always like put a color correction effect, like just say on this shirt with stripes, like hue saturation, and then you can kind of color that however you want and figure out which tie like matches with that the best. To your taste. So that looks bad. I'm thinking the red tie. Yeah, I like that. So then, you could go ahead and color the rest of this, including getting rid of this background from Photoshop and making a new solid. And, you could kind of pick whip this color and then choose something different or whatever. This might look really ugly. And just have fun and come up with some cool colors for that. And, the emphasis is definitely on the animation and working those anchor points in the pre-comps. Thank you very much, and I hope this goes well, and I will see you in the next class.
If you had a microscope and could look at a piece of a leaf, you would see thousands of tiny openings which branch out until the leaf has all of the materials it needs. What happens now?